Hi, this is Lee from the Law School Toolbox. Today we have part 2 in our conversation with Mary Fran, a legal writing professor, and we're talking about the 5 ways to keep your legal writing organized. All right, so we've talked about macro organization and micro organization, and now one of my passions is planning and outlining before you write. Anyone who listens to this podcast has heard me talk about planning and outlining forever and ever. So why is this important when you're doing legal drafting?
Yeah, and feel free to jump in. This is your passion. But I'm also passionate about outlining because I think that writing first and then trying to organize, that's only going to lead to like copy and paste errors. I've definitely suffered from copy and paste errors. They can be super embarrassing. Probably a lot of people listening to this might be able to sympathize with that.
But just let us save you from that experience. Don't do it. And then it's like, we're just going to save you from having to have that experience.
Exactly. And that's why outlining can really avoid those errors. And a strong outline should track how the legal decision should be made, identify any legal issues that must be resolved, and show the logical steps from issue to conclusion. And this is great because this is before you have to do complete sentences, complete citations. With that said, I still recommend you citing the law and putting a pin cite, a page number, so that you don't have to go do that work in the future. But sometimes, especially in your first year of legal writing, citations are really overwhelming. And if you're writing a sentence and then trying to do a citation, that's going to ruin your flow and make it hard for you to figure out how to organize your document. And that's why I think outlining can be super effective. And obviously everyone outlines differently and use different outlining techniques for structuring. But I recommend using the same sections and subsections that will appear in your final memo or brief. So use actual headings you expect to include, like issue, facts, analysis, and under analysis, any subheaders that you expect to use within that section. And then conclusion. And obviously some of these, there aren't going to be a ton of bullet points or Roman numerals, dashes, whatever you use underneath them, but it'll still track to make sure that you have at least a skeletal idea of what's going to go under each heading. And that will help you see early whether your structure makes sense, whether anything's missing, and whether information is placed in the right part of the document. And so if something doesn't fit cleanly into a section in the outline, that actually might be a sign that it doesn't even belong in the final draft. And it's better to cut that in the outline than the draft because, and I remember suffering from this a lot as a 1L, I would write this paragraph and I got really attached to it and I thought it was beautiful, but it just didn't belong. I was overdoing it, or it was a frolic in the issue, and I still kept it because I was attached to it, but my professor was like, this doesn't really make sense here. And it's really hard to delete things that you spend such a long time writing. So if you figure out that a paragraph or an argument doesn't make sense at the outline stage, so much easier to delete something on an outline. And then once you actually have your outline, you can test your reasoning that way before you start writing. It should make sense on its own. So even if somebody else read your outline, as long as they understand your shorthands and whatnot, but they should be able to look at it and understand what the legal issue is, what the really important legal rules are, what those legal rules mean in this context, and how and why those rules lead to the conclusion. So if someone reading your outline can understand all of that, it means that the organization is working. But if the outline instead feels jumbled, redundant, or hard to follow, then that signals to you that maybe you need to reorder the analysis, maybe there's a missing step that you need to add, or maybe you just keep repeating yourself over and over again, and you can see that in the outline, and that doesn't really help a reader if you keep repeating yourself, because they're just going to wonder, why are you repeating yourself? Are you making a new point, or are you just making the point over and over again? Or move material to a different section. And yeah, like I said earlier, this ultimately saves time because it forces you to figure out clarity before you get bogged down by the language, the style, the citation. And then you don't have to don't have to do major structural revisions when you've already written a first draft, rewrite large sections later. And then my biggest thing is it really avoids copy and paste errors. So I just think it's so much easier to fix organizational issues in an outline than in a full draft. So that's why my second tip is outline, outline, outline.
Well, I love that. And I think the other thing that you can see when you're outlining is that it's really like putting puzzle pieces together, right? It's like you've got to match facts with rules, and if you can see that you've got a rule statement and then you've got some facts, and then you can be pretty sure that you're going to have analysis. But it's so easy to get so caught up in the rule statements and the organization, and then that's when we see this conclusory problem, which is very legal writing professor of you to use that terminology just in the middle of the conversation, because I do think that phrase for so many law students creates a lot of confusion. I don't know any law student who hasn't seen conclusory written on their paper, but it's like, right, there's still a lot of confusion often of like, well, what does that mean? And it often means, in my opinion, and you could tell me if you have a different definition, is there was no space for the analysis. Like, you gave me a rule and then you told me the outcome, but I didn't see facts. I didn't see argument. Even if there's no ambiguity, you still have to explain how the facts relate. The outline can make that very clear, because you can have, facts in one color, right? If you don't have any facts in your outline, if all the facts are red and you see a whole section that has no red in it, well, that is like bright flashing lights that there's an issue. So it just gives you that opportunity to really avoid something that we have all had as a pitfall, which is we just want to rush to the answer and not show our work. And that's just not how legal writing is done.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good way of putting it. It's sort of like taking a math test and just putting the answer without showing your teacher how you got the answer. And maybe it's the right answer, but that the professor can't verify that you did it correctly to get to that answer. And similar to a reader might be reading what you've written and think, my gut agrees with your conclusion, but I don't see how you got there. So I just can't trust it.
Yep. Yeah. And as you said, so often we forget. So let's go back to this idea that you're writing for the court, right? That there are human beings like clerks who are sitting there, reading all of this stuff and trying to pull things, from different sections of your briefs and trying to decide what you think. If you can't follow somebody's reasoning in their brief, you are definitely less likely to think that they're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And also I think, judges obviously are brilliant. Like they've made it so far and they know so much. So I think people sometimes think, oh, I don't need to spell it out for a judge because they'll just look at the facts and know immediately. But they see so many different types of cases. And even the cases that they see a lot of, there's rarely ever a case with identical facts. So they need to know, well, yeah, sure, maybe in another case I came out the way you want me to, but why under this set of facts do you want me to make the same conclusion? So I think that's an easy pitfall too, especially when you start getting into persuasive writing. You might breathe a sigh of relief and say, oh, I'm writing to a judge, so they just know. But they don't. It's not because they're not brilliant, and it's not because they don't deserve where they are. It's because they've probably never, or if they have, very rarely seen the same case with the same set of facts twice. They need to be shown, what, and they haven't probably read every case out there. So what cases really apply to this set of facts too? But yeah, I'm going on another frolic.
No, that's okay. But judges are humans too. And I think sometimes we forget that. I mean, I'm at my point in my career that I have friends that are now judges. Yeah. And that's it's interesting when you reach that point and you just realize it's not to say that they're not great legal minds. if any of them are listening, you are all great legal minds, my friends. But it's also a good reminder that, we also were all in study group together, right? Learning this stuff together. Like judges are humans. They can also be tired and cranky or, have not slept well or whose kid was driving them crazy that morning. And so the easier you make their job, the better, because we often forget that these are just human beings with important roles. They still have a real life. They're still juggling all of these things, and everything you can do to make their life easier by doing solid, complete work is typically, going to maybe it won't get you the outcome you want, because we can't always control that. Sometimes we don't have the facts on our side, right? That's just, sometimes that's how it is. But it helps your reputation, and it helps, and it just helps them respect your legal work. And I think even if you don't get the outcomes you're looking for, those are still really critically important things.
Yeah, you're so right. That reminded me of when I graduated college and some of my friends were becoming teachers, and I was like, oh my gosh, you are in charge of classrooms. They all, again, if they're listening to this, you're incredible teachers.
You're incredible. You're the best teachers ever.
Sort of, humanizing your teachers, humanizing your judges. We're literally all humans. Humanizing your professors too. Sometimes they're overwhelmed and they're having bad days, and so whatever you can do to make your professor life easier, grading your work is great too.
Yeah, I remember years after law school, I went back and taught at my law school, and I was having lunch with one of my professors, and she goes, why don't you think people come to my office hours, Lee? I'm there, I'm helpful. Why do you think they don't come? And I was like, oh, I never thought about a professor being sad that they were sitting in their office hours alone.
Yeah.
But it was such a good reminder that, that they're there because they want to help. And, and she's like, I know some of my students are confused. Why aren't they coming to my office hours so I can help them?
Yeah.
We do tend to give people in these roles kind of this otherworldly, identity, when everyone is just people trying to do their job and their role. But, but it's just like the law student who has to show up to have the dialogue with the professor. You do have to kind of show up in your role, which is this written communication role, to make everyone's job easier.
Exactly.
All right. So we have now, we've organized our work, right? We did macro and micro plan. We have an outline because we just didn't sit down and brain dump. We have an outline. Now what do we do?
So my third tip is when you're drafting, really utilize headers to be signposts for your reader. So those really shouldn't be decorations. They're really powerful organizational tools that guide your reader through your reasoning. They orient your reader. They tell them where they are in the document and what issue or argument they are about to encounter. And really good headers allow a reader to skim the document and still understand the structure of your argument and the path from issue to conclusion. When used effectively, headers do part of the organizational work for you by making the structure of your analysis visible before the reader even gets to the paragraphs. And going back to what we were just talking about, anybody except for AI reading your document is a human being, and maybe they're super busy. And reading the headers, that might, if they're good headers, they'll be relieved and say, all right, got it. I know exactly what this person's trying to tell me and why, and now I can read the substance of it with that in mind, that roadmap in mind. So they don't, and it depends obviously on what you're writing. Sometimes you're just labeling sections. But they can also preview the reasoning. So again, you can signal, this is the direction of the argument or my analysis. If you have multiple legal issues, these are the ones that I'm being addressed, and sometimes even inserting some key facts that really drive what you think the conclusion is on those sub issues. And I really think the reason why I wanted to talk about this after outlining is I think that headers are a bridge between your outline and your draft. And if you work really hard on your outline, it's super solid. Sometimes your headers can actually be pulled directly from it. And I mentioned this before. it can function like a roadmap. If they're read together, if they're well written, signal well, it can function like a roadmap of your argument. With that said, effective headers are short and clear, but are descriptive enough to orient the reader without getting too complicated. So it should accurately reflect, obviously, the content of the section that follows and match the tone and purpose of the document. So the goal is for the reader to understand at a glance what the issue or sub-issue is being addressed and how that section fits into the overall analysis. With that said, things to avoid with headers: avoid headers that are vague or generic, overly clever or cute. There might be a time for that, but and I know that that's, a way you can get your creative juices flowing, but that can just be distracting. And also definitely avoid headers that are so long they might as well just be full paragraphs. Headers also shouldn't introduce multiple unrelated ideas, and if they do, that's a big red flag that your section that follows should be 2 sections, not 1. And they also shouldn't oversell the argument. You don't want to sound super confident, and then when the reader's reading it, they're like, oh no, this actually isn't as slam dunk as they're making it to seem, and now I don't really trust them as much. Even though what your argument is still might make sense, and reasonable minds could still agree with you, but if it's not a slam dunk, don't make it sound like one. Obviously still be confident, but again, don't oversell. And yeah, so I think a practical check is, after drafting, try reading only your headers from the top to the bottom and ask yourself, do these tell a coherent story?
Yeah. Nobody likes writing headers, do they?
No.
I mean, I found it super annoying. You just had to do it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But it helps. It helps your readers so much. And that's why it's worth it. Because it's, they're so short, and you're like, I'm spending so much time on such a small percentage of my writing. But it really helps whoever is reading it. I've never met anybody who doesn't pay attention to the headers.
Yeah, and that's their whole point, right?
Yeah.
That's why they're there.
Exactly.
All right, so now we have headers, and then we probably need something under that header. So how do we figure out what goes under the header?
Yeah, so this is a little odd talking about organization, but I think that thinking about your paragraphs is a really important way of organizing. And when I say that, it's because every paragraph should really have its own purpose. They are not just containers to dump information or places to show off how much research you did. I know that is super tempting, especially as a 1L. You found all these cases. You want to make sure your professor knows that you found all these cases. Or, maybe you want to show off to a judge too once you're practicing. I don't know. But that's really not the place for paragraphs. Again, there's still a purpose of what you're writing. And unless it's like a research paper, it's not to show off how much research you've done. So think of each paragraph as being its own unit of reasoning. The goal is to educate the reader enough about the law and show how the facts apply to it so the reader can understand and accept your conclusion. And at this stage, you should aim for each paragraph to introduce one new idea and advance one step in the analysis. And when paragraphs try to do more than one thing, especially at this stage of legal writing, the reasoning becomes really hard to follow. So as you draft and revise, ask yourself, what new thing is this paragraph telling the reader? Obviously, it's probably building off a prior paragraph, so that's not to say that it's suddenly standing alone on an island. They still need to work together to tell a cohesive story. But they shouldn't just be repeating themselves over and over again. So ask yourself, what's the point of this paragraph? And in this paragraph only. And if you can't answer that clearly, the paragraph may be repeating a point you've already made, or it might not be necessary at that stage in the analysis. And so, unfortunately, sometimes you do have to organize post-outline stage. So if that's the case, it might mean the paragraph has to be cut, moved, or combined with another paragraph. And I've said repetition many times talking about paragraphs as a unit of reasoning, but that's because I found that that's one of the most common paragraph level problems in legal writing. And multiple paragraphs saying just essentially the same thing over and over again slows your reader down, obscures the structure of your analysis, and makes it harder for your reader to see the progress towards the conclusion. Even if you're inching to the conclusion, it should always be at least an inch. Don't just flatline for like a page and a half. And like I said before, legal reading's not about showing the reader how much research you did. You don't need to cite every case that you read. You need to use judgment and select cases that best explain the rule and support your reasoning. So effective paragraph organization prioritizes clarity and not completeness for its own sake. And with that said, so with paragraphs, you're going to have, explanation paragraphs, or you're explaining the law, and application paragraphs, or you're applying the facts of your case to the law. And you can really make those paragraphs work together. If your analysis includes, those explanation paragraphs and those application paragraphs, they can mirror each other. And by doing that, it prepares the reader for the structure of what follows. So if they start noticing, oh, okay, so this writer has explained this part of the rule, and then I see they're kind of mirroring that in the application where they're applying the facts of their case to that part of the rule. And that's a way of reaching your micro organization. But when explanation and application don't line up, readers are going to struggle to see how the law is actually being applied. So they're going to wonder, why did you just teach me about that law if you don't have any paragraphs applying the facts to that law? Did you just tell me for my own sake? Am I supposed to do it myself? So that's why I really recommend making sure those paragraphs work together and mirror each other in a way that really makes sense and holds your reader's hand through, this is why I'm teaching you this, because it applies to this case in these ways.
Yeah. I had a law professor who said a good legal argument is like skipping down the path with someone. You just kind of like move through it. But a legal argument that is not working is like slogging through the mud. And I've never forgotten that from like my first semester, because sometimes you will in your own work feel like you are slogging through mud. Mm-hmm. And if that's true, like something is off. It could be the organization, it could be you're missing some legal research to plug in some holes. But I think when you feel like it is tight and working, it does feel like it just skips down the path. You go from one thing to the next, right? And you're just moving along. But we've all had moments where our work is slogging through the mud. And that's where I think you have to kind of take that step back. And, I think especially for students with ADHD or who struggle with some of this linear work, I think you sometimes have to get a little creative about how you do these checkpoints for yourself. And I think kind of changing your relationship with the work. So I love, it used to be doing it with highlighters, but you can now do it on your screen. But like, make sure you're going through and you're like, every IRAC in the paragraph needs to be color coded to make sure that you've got each piece, right? Or if you are saying like, okay, there are 4 elements to this rule and each paragraph is an element, can I highlight those and show myself that I've hit all of those kind of requirements? I think taking that step back and giving yourself some scaffolding and cross-checking, I think that is something we often don't do enough of in our work, especially when it's high-stakes work, which in law school would be your graded assignments in legal writing. And then, of course, their high-stakes work at work. But, you got to get there. You got to get the law license and stuff first. But if you can start to find out how you can double-check your own work and make sure there aren't these gaps, I think that will work together. You gave great suggestions, right? Doing a pass where you just read the headers and make sure that that's a cross check. Maybe it's going through and double checking that you always have an IRAC or CREAC, making, if you can come up with those lists of those things that you can do, you're just much less likely to skip a step. And that is so easy, especially when you work on these assignments, sometimes for weeks, or intensely over a shorter period of time. you can just, it all starts to get like gobbledygook. You have to do something to really find that structure. And I think we know that so many law students struggle, especially with attention issues. And that it's really important to give yourself some scaffolding around these best practices and say, how am I going to make sure I have not skipped this step? And with a little creativity, I think you can create that scaffolding for yourself. And you might save yourself a lot of heartache if you do that.
Absolutely. I even have students who put, as they're drafting, headers that they later delete, just saying rule, and then they put the rule, explanation, and maybe they'll do a dash and do like this part of the rule. And then they have it all, and then they delete the headers and read it and make sure that it flows. But I found that to be really effective for some people. Obviously, what's going to work for one person might not necessarily work for another. But yeah, I think that's such a good point, is how whatever you can do to keep yourself on track, do it. There's no harm in it. You're not submitting it all highlighted or with, the word rule above every rule that you have, but it helped you get the product that you felt good about submitting.
I mean, nobody knows how the sausage is made, right? So it's like, it really doesn't matter what is the path to get there. And as you get better and better, you may not need so much scaffolding. It may become more automatic, but relying on these kind of creative solutions to make yourself go back and cross-check your own work, I think it can be really powerful.
Absolutely. And it's training yourself.
Yeah.
Again, like we said at the beginning, it's practice. I've been doing yoga or practicing yoga for 20 years, and I've definitely not perfected it. So I think of that the same with legal writing. I love legal writing, and I think it's so fun. I haven't perfected it. I'm still practicing it. So, putting on training wheels, that's whatever those training wheels look like for you, nothing to be ashamed of, because you're just practicing, and then you're training your brain, and then one day you might be able to take them off, and you didn't even realize that you were getting to that point.
Right. Or sometimes if you are an inflexible person like me, who's been doing yoga now for probably like 25 years, you just use the block. Because you just need the block, right? I mean, like, there are going to be some things where, like, my body just doesn't do that.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter how much yoga I do. And there's something about just saying there's that too. It's like, if you are just someone who needs to have some of the scaffolding in place, go for it. Again, it doesn't really matter. The result's the same. So
that's such a good analogy.
They're just, I'm not going to be bendy in certain ways. It doesn't matter for forever. That ship has sailed for me, and I'm okay with it. I've made peace with it. All right. Well, we've made it to our fifth tip. So what is your fifth tip for us today?
So now we're getting to the smallest unit of your writing, your sentences. One way to keep your writing organized is by keeping your sentences simple, focused, and purposeful. So one of the most effective ways to keep legal writing organized and easy to follow is just simplifying your sentences. Because if your sentences are overloaded, readers are going to lose track of what point you're making and how that point fits into the larger analysis. Sort of like we were talking about at the beginning, some people are compelled to have these beautiful, flowery sentences. They're writing to a judge, and they're like, of course the judge, they're so smart, they know all these words. But judges are humans too, and they just want to figure out how you're getting from point A to point B. And one way to make that clear to them is by super simple sentences. So definitely avoid cramming multiple ideas into a single sentence. And like I just said, avoid trying to sound fancy or overly formal. Clear, straightforward sentences make the structure of your reasoning a lot easier to see. And a useful test to ask is, does this sentence need to be reread to understand it? And because I still do that in my own writing. I write something, I go back to it a week later, and sometimes I need to reread a sentence that I myself wrote, and I realize, oh, this is, not the sentence you thought it was a week ago. You need to break this up. Because especially if I need to reread something that I wrote, that's probably a good indication that your reader's going to have to do that too. I'm also a super, super big proponent of reading your draft out loud. That really helps catch sentences that are doing too much, breaks in logic, awkward flow that disrupts organization. If a sentence is hard for you to say, it's probably also hard for a reader to follow it. There's even like a function on Microsoft Word that will read it for you. So if you have trouble reading out loud and you need, it would be helpful to have Microsoft Word read it to you. That's something that's helped me in the past too, is just listening to a computer read it to me. That can be super helpful. So yeah, like I said earlier, every paragraph should have a clear purpose. So that means at the sentence level, you're asking yourself, how does this sentence advance the purpose of this paragraph? And if a sentence introduces a new idea unrelated to the paragraph's purpose, repeats a point previously made without adding anything new, pulls the analysis in a different direction, if any of those things are happening, it may need to be revised, moved, or cut. So sentence level focus really helps ensure that your paragraphs are staying cohesive and on track. And I wanted to end with sentences because something that I really believe in with organization is a strong topic sentence. Those do a lot of the organizational heavy lifting because a strong topic sentence tells the reader what this paragraph is about and why it matters at this point in the analysis. I actually have a general rule, which is to avoid incorporating case names in the body of your topic sentence and instead lead with the legal principle or point that you're making in the paragraph. Of course, still provide a citation sentence after that sentence to support what you're asserting, but you'll realize that when you start taking case names out of topic sentences, it's actually forcing you to make sure that that paragraph has a purpose. You're not just doing a summary of a case, you are educating your reader what that case or cases tell them about the law that you are educating them on and then applying facts to. So yeah, I wanted to end my tips on topic sentences because I really think they do a ton of work, at least for me as a reader.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I have elementary school age kids, and my oldest is now learning how to write, essays. And there's a lot of talk about topic sentences. And I was thinking about it the other day of how little we talk about them as like grown-up writers. And so I loved saying that you wanted to talk about it because we spend a lot of time talking about topic sentences now, and it's not something I've thought about in a number of years. So it's kind of interesting to come full circle.
Yeah. Well, and they probably are a little more natural to you now when you're writing.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I do remember as a 1L, I remember my legal writing professor giving me that case name instruction and like completely freezing. And I was like, how could I do that? And now I'm like, oh yeah, that works so much better. Mm-hmm. So much easier for a reader to understand what you're trying to say without them. But I'm saying all these things with the caveat that when you're first starting out, especially, it's super hard. All of this, you are drinking out of a fire hose, and whatever sticks, great. Not everything's going to stick at first. And these tips, hopefully, over time, will start sticking and help you.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier as well, is you've got to test this stuff out to find your own process, your own voice, your own best practices, but that is going to serve you well. And whether or not AI is helping you draft, like all this stuff about scaffolding and cross-checking and making sure that everything is as it needs to be and is perfect, that is still your responsibility. Because if you file something that is screwed up because AI wrote it, AI is not going to get in trouble. You are still responsible. So, all of these skills are still going to be very necessary, even if the computers are helping us draft, because in the end, it is not just your professional reputation, it is literally your bar license that you put on the top of a filing for court that says that you have checked all of this work. So it is really serious business and a craft that you want to work on, even if there are going to be shortcuts to make it a bit easier. So I love a good organization conversation. Thank you, Mary Fran, for spending the afternoon with me to talk about this. I think there have been some really great nuggets in there. And we can always work on our craft. And in the end, this is a craft, right?
Absolutely. No, thank you. I again, I know people will roll their eyes at this, but I do think this is fun. So I'm in the right field. But
You are?
yeah, so thank you for letting me come and talk about this for a little bit.
Absolutely. We will find another exciting topic to talk about in legal writing in the future. If anyone has any questions for Mary Fran, you can reach out to us on our contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com, and we will circle back. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to give us a like and leave us a comment. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future content. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com.